And if you want to follow them, either join well, we'll talk in a minute, but you can join the NSGIC 3DHP interest, 3DHP, I'm getting the EDH interest group, or watch the NSGIC homepage. It'll be on the events calendar. So today we're fortunate to have with us several speakers, and they're going to be talking about elevation-derived hydrography activities in both Michigan and in Mississippi. Just quick reference, if you're not aware, the EDH for 3DHP is a NSGIC USGS cooperative agreement, and the purpose is to engage state and local governments and their private sector partners in the derivation of high-resolution hydrography data from 3DHP LiDAR, and of course IFSAR in Alaska. I thought I'd start with a quick project update. For those of you that attended the project introduction webinar, you'll see our key tasks for year one are on the right. And I thought I'd just bring you up to date where we are on those. The monthly forum, there was a project introduction webinar last month, and that recording and Q&A doc are available at the NSGIC Learning link. You can go in there and search EDH. If you're not sure how to do that, just contact myself, Emily, or Phil, and we can help you with that. And if you have an interest in presenting or have topics you would like addressed during this forum, please contact me directly and let us know what you'd like to talk about or what you'd like to say. We're also, we established 2 communities at mynsgic.org. There's the EDH with 3DHP interest group. This is if you just have a general interest in elevation-derived hydrography and are interested in the occasional project update. And then there's a separate working group, and that's for folks that actively want to engage with project tasks. Over here on the side, you'll see like the deriving of critical factors and resources. If you do join the working group, please also join the interest group, as that's where more general information and posts about activities and things like that will be made. So again, working group is for those that want to actually engage with project tasks, and the other is our general information site. Another step that we have is to inventory state and regional elevation-derived hydrography experiences. We are just this close. We hope to show it to you today, but we're just this close to finalizing that inventory. It'll be a survey 1, 2, 3 inventory. It's in final review, and it will be announced via the NSGIC listserv. If you have folks in your organization who are active in EDH, but are not NSGIC members or on any of the NSGIC community, NSGIC activities, please forward this information. Those 2 My NSGIC communities are open for everybody, so they can join up there. That's the best place to make sure you stay in touch. But if you see activities or announcements or presentations coming along that you think that might be of interest, please forward this information to those folks outside of the NSGIC membership. And we are also actively establishing EDH for 3DHP information hub, where we're going to consolidate a lot of this information, products, inventories, all that sort of stuff will be consolidated in a single information hub.
And with issues potentially here as well, since we'll be sharing our screen, using up most of the real estate. So again, I'm Mark Holmes. I'm the Geospatial Services Manager for State of Michigan. So, and Nick, are you on? Do you want to just test your audio, introduce yourself? And
yep, I'm here. My name is Nick Weil. I work at RS&GIS, which is a group at Michigan State University.
All right. So maybe, Nick, you can share. You're going to be sharing the slides. I'll have you share, get the slides up. So we're going to present our recent activities here within Michigan, recent being really the last couple of years. We've been looking to improve our hydrography data and figuring out based off of, we've developed the hydrography from the 1 to 100,000, 1 to 24,000 maps, creating that, providing that into USGS for the state of Michigan. But we've looked at, Michigan has completed QL2 LiDAR in the past year here. So with LiDAR data coming in, we really wanted to take a look at what we could do with hydrography. So today we'll talk about those activities, some of the pilot projects, and really want to get, from the group here, if there's any feedback or input that folks have. We'd like to get that, to really consider it in our refinement as we continue moving forward with our project. So Nick, if you move on to the next slide, I'll give a little bit of background to the project. So back in late 2018, we actually formed a hydrography focus group made up of representatives from multiple state agencies. We had Michigan State University involved as well. Really taking a look at if we did move forward on this, what were some of the things that we wanted to accomplish? And taking a look at the different use cases, the different programs that would benefit. So really taking a holistic approach, look at everything, but then figuring out what do we need to do to start. So 2019, we engaged MSU's RS and GIS. They did a proof of concept with 3 small areas, different areas of the state, different topography, and tested out some methodologies for developing the flow lines, new flow lines based off of that QL2 LiDAR data. That proof of concept went well. We looked at what can we do in 2020. And the focus group decided, let's try to do a watershed. So we turned that into a pilot project and had MSU take the information learned through the proof of concept and extrapolate that out, use those methodologies, refine methodologies, look at other ways to improve the process. And Nick's going to talk a lot in detail on that. But really, again, just focusing on flow line development from the LiDAR. And what we did find out in the proof of concept was just the importance of having culvert information. So that was a big part here as well. Part of this is since 2018 as well as been coordinating with USGS. So we did have some calls with USGS staff with our focus group when we started out on this. I know MSU has been keeping in contact and communication. And again, as we move forward, we know it's going to be very important to continue to coordinate with USGS on how we move forward. If we go to the next slide, Nick. Just quickly here, the hydrography focus group, I like to show this just because there were so many different use cases that came out of it, different programs, that this improved data set will benefit over time. So we did gather a lot of information around these different programs and how it would benefit them short-term and long-term. Then over to the next slide, Nick. So last one here, and then I'll hand it over to Nick to get into more of the details on the pilot. But this is the Kalamazoo River watershed. So this was the area that was chosen for 2020, our pilot project. And you can see here, the green lines are what was in NHD through the flow line development. All the additional dark blue lines is what was additional gathered information using the processes. But just this area here, the focus group really looked at it as a blend of rural, urban, also just topography. So Michigan has some different topographies. We've got the Porcupine Mountains up in the western part of the Upper Peninsula. We've got over in around the Lake Huron, St. Clair River area. It's called the Thumb, Michigan, very flat landscape over there. And everything in between. So this one had some different topography within the area than just from partnerships, which we felt were going to be important, especially in gathering culvert information. We knew that we had various partnerships within different local organizations to be able to help add additional source information to help with the project. So those are some of the key factors in determining this project. But at this point, I'll hand it over to Nick and let him roll through some of his slides on our project and processes.
All right, thanks, Mark. So I'm Nick Weil. I've got 2 other colleagues at MSU here that have, we've all partnered together to work through this pilot, Robert Goodwin and Joe Welsh. So I'll start a little bit going through the data resources that we're using. Of course, the current NHD, as Mark mentioned, the QL2 LiDAR, which Michigan has full coverage of at this point. And within that, kind of under that umbrella of QL2 LiDAR, we're using the DEMs, the break lines to identify water bodies and areas, and then the intensity data that comes out of that point cloud. We're also using recent high resolution leaf off ortho imagery. lot for culvert detection and also just visually seeing if we're in the right spot with our flow lines. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service National Wetlands Inventory, or NWI, and we're also collaborating with the state of Michigan, EGLE, Eagle, Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. They're working together to update NWI, and we'll be utilizing some of that information in partnership with them. And finally, culvert databases. This has been a big thing. We say over and over, we never knew how much our lives would revolve around culverts, but after doing this, these pilot projects, it's the basis for everything. We've compiled culverts from different Michigan communities within the watershed we're working on. MDOT, the Department of Transportation, they had done a culvert inventory. The Transportation Asset Management Council, another group in Michigan, as well as the Michigan DNR. So this is the objectives of our pilot project were to develop methodologies to be able to update NHD geography, including flow lines, areas, and water bodies, build efficient and repeatable models that can complete the data processing while leveraging our existing knowledge of the system, establish relationships and connections with stakeholders to be able to get buy-in from people at the state to help provide data and support, and then finally come up with kind of just a rough budgetary cost for expanding this effort out across the state. So I mentioned culverts already. That was kind of the best way to start this process. And we gathered existing data that was already out there and merged it all together. A lot of the different data sets, both collected at the state level and by different communities, were in different formats. Some people were actually out there with a GPS unit, collecting one end of a culvert and then going over and collecting the other end and including a bunch of attribute information. Some people were just collecting a point location at the center of a culvert. And so we had to figure out how to get these points, convert them to lines, going the right direction, and make them into usable line features that we could burn into the DEM. Then we used some other tools, particularly one developed by USGS to identify possible culvert locations by looking at the DEM and seeing where there were depressions that were filling, and then using some thresholding techniques saying, okay, there might be a culvert here, take a look. That ended up not working out as well as we had hoped. But through kind of all these different methods, building an authoritative culvert data set within this HUC 10 that we're looking at. And then the different types of culverts that we were collecting are broken into the groups at the bottom there. These are for major and minor roads, driveways, culverts in fields that farmers might use to access different locations, and then other barriers to flow. And I'll have some examples showing that, what I mean by that. So when we were all said and done, this is our culvert inventory for this HUC 8 that we're working on, Kalamazoo River watershed. It's kind of tough to see, but there's just so many features. It was tough to fit it all in there. But if you look at the colors there, the green kind of going along the main trunk lines were collected by MDOT. There's some yellow features in there, which were mostly those points that we had to convert to lines. And then everything in red is what we manually digitized. We ended up using kind of a grid approach and just putting eyes on every area within this watershed to figure out where the culverts were. And at this point, we've got about 40,000, and that's not saying we have everything. There's still things in there. So here's some examples of the types of culverts that we're putting in. The yellow ones right along the road there were already collected by another group, as I said, and the red ones were all hand digitized by us. So you can see kind of over at the east side there, we have driveway culverts, and then you get off the road and out into fields, and there's all manner of culverts that have to be put in so that we can accurately model how the water's flowing. Here's another example. These green culvert lines were collected by MDOT. These were very precise because they were using a GPS unit to collect them. But you can see in this example here, it didn't quite go all the way through on the DEM. So sometimes we had to draw a line over top of it extending it out a little bit so we could actually break through those barriers and accurately model our flow. And I mentioned barriers to flow, those types of culverts that we were including as well. This is a side-by-side of the DEM and the orthoimagery. So you can see it might be an actual barrier in the DEM, a bridge here, but then also things like this that are branches across the river. Maybe the LiDAR wasn't able to get through all the overstory vegetation. So it's tough to model water flowing through this obvious stream here. So we kind of put in these culverts, so to speak, to allow water to flow there. Once we've got our culverts in place, then we start doing flow lines. We're going for full hydro enforcement, starting by filling the DEM, calculating flow direction and accumulation, and then determining an appropriate threshold of accumulation to at least mirror current NHD lines. So here's what we came out with at the end, and zoomed in a little bit. The different colors represent different accumulation thresholds. I can't remember exactly what we were at for this, but I think the blue was maybe something like 600,000 pixels, and then kind of stepping down 5, 4, and then the yellow might have been down to like 25,000 pixels. So how much area is contributing to create a flow line in those places. So it's kind of a balance of determining what's too much information and what do we need to be able to get what represents NHD. So once we have that threshold determined and have those lines, we convert them from raster to vector streams. That process both gives us a vector line and also creates the correct flow direction so that we have that directionality, and we have a completely networked data set where all the lines are connected to one another and actually flowing downstream. We're doing attribution, giving it the threshold information and saying, okay, here's maybe a useful flow line, but it's not currently part of NHD, and determining all that information that we're attaching to those lines. Once we have that in place, we do flow line editing and smoothing. So I think we're going to be smoothing before we edit, but kind of removing some of those jagged portions out of the line and then editing to make sure that they're in the right spot. Maybe there's a culvert that we missed, and so we have to go back and manually edit, get that line going where it needs to be. Here's an example of the smoothing process. The purple is kind of the raw line that comes out. You can see it has all those sharp corners from the raster, and then we just apply a smoothing threshold there that makes it more appealing. Here's another example. Again, purple is the original, and then the smoothed version over top. And then here, the blue is the actual NHD line. So you can see it's definitely outside of the drain. And then the purple is the raw line that we get. And then that's the smoothed version. So way more visually appealing and spatially accurate. Aside from the flow lines, we need to develop water bodies. So we gathered the LiDAR break lines. So these are areas that are already defined as water that were hydro-flattened through the DEM creation process. Also, I mentioned the data sharing with Eagle and getting those updated NWI features. And then finally, things that are missing, we are looking into using some feature classification with orthoimagery paired with the DEM LiDAR point cloud to determine automatically some water areas. And then finally, in the end, if there's anything missing, we'll do manual water body digitization. And here's kind of an example of the culmination of all those different layers. At the left, we have what we get from the LiDAR break lines. And then the second image, we've overlaid what's currently in NHD. You can see the LiDAR break lines are a little bit more accurate spatially. And then finally, we've layered on top NWI. So that brings in the majority of the rest of the water bodies in this example, but you can still see a few things are missing. So we'll pick those up with either some AI models or manually. So some of the challenges that we've experienced, firstly, right off the bat, disparate and incomplete culvert data. As I mentioned, everyone's collecting it differently. There's a lot of missed pieces, even once you get it all brought together. And there's just a massive number of culverts, just so many. We had no idea how many there would be. Kind of going along with that, there was a lack of an efficient automated culvert process. The USGS tool was great, and the people that developed it were really helpful to work with, but it was very, very time consuming. I had it running on a pretty powerful computer, and it ran for about 3 weeks. And I didn't know if it was going to finish, and finally it did. And it was just so many points to review that we had to put eyes on each one and say, oh yeah, I think there actually might be a culvert there, is where it should be. That it just in the end wasn't helpful enough. And going along with that, this is big data processing, and that has its own unique challenges. Figuring out the right size to approach this project at, when we would try to give it the whole watershed. Sometimes it was just too much for some of the tools, and it ended up taking longer to process the whole thing than if we had broken it up into smaller bite-sized pieces. So we kind of discovered that 10 is a good extent to process that, and then merge back into the full watershed that we're looking at. And then finally, there's an NHD and that should be EDH mismatch. There's areas where they just don't align. Here's an example of that, kind of particularly unique. So everything in the bright green is what is currently NHD. So there's some sort of a muck farm or sod farm here, and there's just tons of NHD lines. And when we ran this through and developed our flow lines, we came out with the blue lines there. And so no number of culverts or anything is going to get us to kick out lines just like that. So that's something we'll have to tackle and deal with manually, probably. Here's another example. So again, NHD is in the bright green, and what we came up with is in the blue, and we've got a lot more lines. So we're going to have to determine a process of saying, this is an important line. How do we say we feel that this should be included in NHD? And then just the process of the conflation between lines that are essentially overlapping each other, just in the right spot now. Here's some successes that we've experienced. We have come up with a robust methodology for mapping culverts, a lot of different trial and error, but we have an accurate and authoritative data set. And hopefully this can be the basis for a state of Michigan authoritative culvert data set. We've got a flexible, inclusive flow line model, so we can work at a variety of scales and set our thresholds to get lines that we like and smooth them appropriately. And then we figured out that processing level that works well. And probably most importantly, we've got new relationships established, USGS, US Forest Service, within the state of Michigan, a lot of different agencies that have come together that are working with us. And then at the community level, it would be great as we continue on through this process to get buy-in from drain commissioners. Maybe they have already drain information that is spatially accurate that we can use and incorporate. So our next steps are to establish a project for the conflation that I mentioned before, bringing these attributes that we generate along and attaching NHD information to it. Defining thresholds for flow lines and attributes, working that out a little bit more, both through collaboration with USGS and others, and working through those best practices and guidelines. Putting together a project plan and timeline for the regional hydrography development, continuing that outreach to stakeholders, getting more buy-in, more awareness, and helping people to share their data. And this is a long-term maintenance plan, hopefully, and roll up updates through the Michigan Geographic Framework Data Hub, as well as to USGS NHD. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Nick, this is Mark. I'll just add a couple other items on that next step slide. So as Nick mentioned, one of our objectives moving forward is to start looking at a pilot project for conflation piece. So Michigan State University has been focused on development of the flow lines, but we want to start looking at conflation of the NHD attributes over the new flow lines. So we're actually going to be looking to bring on a consultant to work with our focus group and MSU on that portion of the project. Most likely taking that Kalamazoo Rivershed and actually piloting a conflation project there. And as Nick mentioned, just the importance of collaborating with USGS on that and really determining what those thresholds are for, especially flow lines that are additional ones beyond what current NHD has, and what should be attributed that may not have attributes, which ones maybe do not get attributes but just remain as reference and can still be part of flow models. So those are things we're really interested in finding out information as we move along. Again, working with USGS for some guidance and guidelines there, but also others in the GIS community here. So others that may have done similar projects or thinking about it like we are, getting some feedback as we move into this next phase, and then continuing to build out from there, across the state as we can, kind of like we did with LiDAR, just kind of moving and building out that project region by region. So yeah, we'll open up for any questions, or Linda, however you want to handle it at this point.
There's a couple, this is Phil, there's a couple questions in the chat. I'll just state them here. Could you please provide more specifics about the USGS tool you used for finding potential culvert locations? Could you provide a reference? And you might just paste the reference into the chat or and give us off the top of your head response to the rest.
Yeah, I can provide the name for the tool. I was working with Curtis Price at USGS, and it was a ARC toolbox, and it had a culvert detection tool in there specifically. Curtis has since retired, but when we first started the pilot, he was very responsive with updating the Python code and sending me new toolboxes. I'll look up the name of that exactly. I know that they published a white paper on some of their research. The flow accumulation threshold that we kind of settled on that mirrored NHD was 400,000 pixels. For the most part, that gave us way more flow lines than we needed. There's still some areas where NHD extended on considerably, but you had to get a very low threshold to get any accumulation there at all. So that's kind of a challenge that we're going to have to address. Maybe some of these NHD lines really shouldn't be there.
Pixel size was what?
I think that it was 2 meters. I would have to double check.
Okay. Yeah, that would be helpful. So 400,000 at 2 meters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I can verify that as well.
Do we know how many acres that is? And the reason I ask is in other areas, the local res NHE has been done by, say, identifying or using a 6-acre catchment as a threshold.
Oh, okay.
Curious how that might compare or contrast.
Yeah.
Without having to do the math here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nick, this is Everett. If that was the 2 foot, I think if that was the QL2 DEM from the FEMA projects.
Yes. Yeah.
That was a 2 foot.
Oh, okay.
Pixel.
2 feet. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. 2 foot pixel. Okay. Yes, it's being recorded. Let's see, any other questions? Do the new flow lines have Z values populated from the DEM?
We actually had a meeting this morning and we're discussing the importance of that, whether or not we would include maybe a start and end point for each stream reach. But yeah, that's something we plan to incorporate.
And I know you started before the USGS EDH specifications were published, but are you currently using them or planning to use them going forward?
Yeah, Bob's been MSU's been looking through those along the way here recently, and that's our plan to, again, coordinate with USGS, use what information we can through there, but also, be bringing up questions and things we may run into, and reach back out for any kind of guidance along the way too. So we'll be part of the work group here, and I think it's just going to be kind of a full collaboration to figure out, where we can go moving forward with some of this. Are we getting too, how far out are we getting based off what's been put in there? So we're definitely going to be, referencing that documentation.
And
Linda?
hi, this is Becky Anderson with USGS with NHT, and I just wanted to mention that I put a note in the chat that I'm really interested to hear more about who's hungry for this data in Michigan, but my email address is in there, so just shoot me a quick email and I'll help to connect you guys to whomever you need to talk with at US.
Maybe it's not a quick question. I know. So you haven't yet done conflation to the NHD in your pilot area, correct?
Correct.
But you have it ready for conflation. Would that be an appropriate summary of where it's at?
We're doing the final editing right now. So we're going to be splitting our flow lines to the point where they represent what NHD is. And at that point, we'll be ready for conflation.
Interesting. Okay,
Mhm.
so
And then we still need to define the conflation process. That's where we're going to be looking to bring a consultant on here soon to start working with us to help build out that process, try to figure out the efficiency to making it as efficient as possible. What can be automated, what type of cleanup needs to be done. So yeah, bringing a consultant on and then focusing on a pilot to,
Becky, was your question, Becky Anderson, would you like to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, so I was just, asking, and I'm really interested in who you kind of mentioned for just kind of a moment, who was hungry for the EDH data in Michigan. And I'm really curious about any kind of use cases for anyone on the call that you guys have that are really specific, that are, we know that there are great applications for these types of data with flooding and things like that, but what are the maybe less well-known applications or very local applications? I think you mentioned something about grain, so I don't know if you could speak to that for a minute, but
Yeah,
it's
I shared
really
Mark's
helpful.
slide here about some of the use cases that people are interested in. And maybe Mark, you can talk about some of the groups at the state that want these data.
Yeah, the focus group put this together back in late 2018, early 2019, and we compiled some more information on each of them in a document. So Becky, I could share some of that info with you. I'll try to get my memory to take me back to that time when we're working through them all. But I know really from a big part of it was just any of the additional work that needed to be done in some of these specific local project areas, especially around fisheries, habitats, for example, where some of those areas there needed to be work to go in and digitize or move some of the positions of the flow lines within those areas. So, definitely on the fisheries, the habitats, that they were looking for this, new layer based off of LiDAR data in the future. Things like emergency management, flow modeling was a big piece of it as well, just for different programs. If it was floodplain, if it was from an emergency management standpoint, we had an event, I'm going to say 2-3 years ago, up in the Upper Peninsula, big rain event, washed out a lot of roads, a lot of infrastructure, culverts as well, out in that area. So, sort of an emergency management standpoint of being able to do flow modeling, predictions, those kinds of things, and having more of a flow line inventory, or expanding that out into more flow lines. That was another piece that was talked about quite a bit in our discussions. But I can get more info for you. I do have some of that stuff documented a little bit more that I can share some of that with you.
Yeah, we'll share the Q&A with the presenters so you guys can take your time and refine some of these responses. And then Phil's question, did you also update the watershed boundary, the WBD for the pilot area?
No, we have not done that. We've just been focusing on the lines and water bodies.
All right, I have some post-presentation questions I would like to ask the presenters, but I see if anybody else, any of the other participants, I see a question. What is the end game for the culvert database? Is it a statewide culvert database?
Yes, so our Michigan Geographic Framework Data Hub, we envision that being an inventory for culverts long-term. So Nick mentioned the Department of Transportation has collected their culverts statewide on their road, trunk line road network. There's culvert activity happening all across the state. Culverts has been quite a buzzword through a lot of different projects across projects. So as we continue to inventory those, that data would be continue to be uploaded through our tools. Basically, our Michigan Geographic Framework Data Hub is our state spatial data infrastructure platform. So we want to be able to, as MDOT has updates, they can push their updates as a contributor. If it's a local road commission, if it's the drain commission in the counties that have geographic features, they can be providing that information up into there. So there are activities going on in parallel right now across the state or within groups across the state in helping to define some of the asset management, which culverts is part of. So from a schema, from condition ratings, all those things, there's a lot of activity going on at culvert. So yes, long-term, there would be an inventory of that culvert data.
And then how much manual editing have you found to be necessary?
So we're kind of just getting into that process of looking at our derived flow lines. So I don't have a very good answer, but we're going to be working through that. Hopefully not a lot. That's that's our goal.
And then Phil, you wanted to ask again about the fake culverts?
Yeah, so we've been attributing the culverts as we've been collecting them. Ones that we're certain are actual culverts, and then ones that are just kind of barriers to flow, like maybe some messy vegetation in a drain or a tree across a stream. We've been attributing that as such so that if we want to provide an actual culvert data set, we can just grab those and post them. And then, I mean, the end goal is to have a fully hydro-enforced DEM product that people can use for hydrologic modeling.
Has anyone discussed the legal drains in this project?
Meaning like drain commissioner drains?
Lorraine, would you like to elaborate on your question?
Yes, like in Indiana, the county commissioners have legal drains, and that's been a question that's come up here among geologists and environmental folks about knowing where all the legal drains are. And I'm just wondering if that's come up in your project at all.
Not specifically. We had reached out to county drain commissioners asking if they had GIS data to share of where drain locations were. We didn't have, I don't think that we came up with anything in this watershed. I know that some areas of Michigan have those data sets that are very spatially accurate, and some people aren't using GIS at all. But the distinction of legal drains isn't something that we've really talked about.
And there's another project, I don't know how far along it is, but Department of Agriculture Rural Development, they work a lot with the intercounty drains between the various counties. Like Nick mentioned, there's some that have GIS data, some is still paper source. But that's part of on our next steps that we talked about, additional stakeholder stakeholders, reaching out to additional stakeholders. So that was one that was identified, especially when we get into some of the flat areas of eastern Michigan, up around the north of the Port Huron area where it's very flat, and some of these different drains and are going to be important in some of those areas.
And then Cindy, would you like to elaborate on your question? If not, I'll read it. You had mentioned including tractor crossings as culverts to include your analysis. The Kalamazoo River Basin is moderately agriculture. Are you planning the same level of detailed analysis when you move to evaluating more intensely farm and flatter parts of the state?
Yes, we kind of have been thinking about the need to modify our approach in different areas of Michigan. We chose the Kalamazoo watershed in part because of the diverse land cover within that area. But when you get over to the east side of the state, as Mark was saying, in the thumb, it is just flat as a pancake and intensively tiled and drained for agriculture. There are drainage ditches that are, I mean, over 10 feet deep, and just massive man-made structures there. So that's going to be a different process than mapping a natural drain through the forest. So yeah, we know that we're going to have to kind of change our approach depending on the land cover and land use across Michigan.
All right, and then Phil wants to know, will the NWI and the NHD match at the end?
I don't know the answer to that, if there is collaboration in that area, but I mean, we'll be including what NWI information we get into the water bodies layer. So hopefully those things all come together in the end.
All right, I have a few questions I'd like to ask. So if you were redoing the project, what would you do differently this round?
So this was a pilot designed to determine the correct way of doing things before embarking on a statewide project. But that being said, I think that we would spend less time trying to integrate the existing culvert data because we just found it took so much time and then it was not accurate spatially. And just kind of do the brute force manual identification of those culverts. It would have been better if we could identify the correctly sized processing subset earlier on in the process. We kept trying to push through larger areas than the software was capable of handling. And then spend more time at the front end determining maybe some open source workflows. We're fortunate at MSU to have a high capacity computing system available to us, but that doesn't really work well with proprietary software. So you have to kind of have code that you can just put there and run. So transferring our workflow to that environment would be good.
All right. So what surprised you in this process?
Yeah, we had some surprises jump out at us. We weren't really prepared for the extent that we'd need to account for these different barriers in rivers, putting in these pseudo culverts. The number of culverts on streams and drains and driveways and fields. When you are driving and you're doing a project like this, you look at the landscape a little bit differently and you start to notice all of these culverts out there as you're traveling across the state. And there's just so many more than we would have thought. And you need to have a lot of them to accurately generate these flow lines. The inaccuracy of existing culvert data, we knew that a lot of these were collected with GPS units out in the field, so we thought they'd be spot on, and it just wasn't always the case. And then the lack of success in automatically determining culvert locations, that was surprising as well. And then finally, in the back end, the mismatch between the existing NHD and the elevation-derived hydrography, and how off they were in some places. Some places that the flow line process worked really great, and then in other places, specifically wetlands or wooded areas, it's really tough to tell where the line should be. And then just that lack of collaboration between the NHD and the NWI, and kind of missing some of those water bodies, specifically in NHD.
So what resources other than the data, in other words, you talked a little bit about the tool you used, but were there documents or online resources or other things that you found valuable to the process?
It was a little tough to hear you at the end there.
What resources other than the data? You talked a little bit about the assessment tool that you used and using the specifications, but were there any other resources, documents, online resources that you found valuable to the process?
Oh, sure. Really, people were the most valuable resource. Staff within the state of Michigan, data users, science managers, outreach people, that was really critical. The USGS staff, I mentioned Curtis Price earlier. We'd also been talking with Larry Stanislawski about some of the AI methodologies that he's developing to both find culverts and determine flow lines. We did some idea and method sharing with the U.S. Forest Service, specifically Trevor Hobbs, and then just our internal team of analysts at MSU. So people were really a big that was very valuable through the process.
Are there any resources you found needing? Any recommendations for resources that might be developed to assist in the derivation?
Other than QL2 or better LiDAR data, more clear guidelines from USGS regarding the thresholding and smoothing process, what's appropriate and what's too much smoothing. Quality culvert data from previous inventories, if available. It's always about culverts. Recent leaf-off high-resolution ortho imagery, which we have a pretty good program for collecting in the state of Michigan. Spatially accurate community drain data, we just kind of talked about that, that it doesn't really exist for a lot of places, but if it does, that's really helpful. The updated water bodies from NWI will be really useful. And then high capacity computing systems to really process these data quickly is a big help.
Thank you all so much, and thanks to the participants for your patience today. More than a few technical difficulties. Nick and Mark, thank you in particular. Steve and Jim, thank you guys as well. We'll get you in a future call. Maybe we need to limit these to one state per call. I think we had a little learning process today. So if you have questions or anything to follow up, you can contact Phil or myself. We are going to share the recording. Hopefully we'll be sharing the PowerPoint, and we'll also be compiling the Q&A, including your questions from the chat. As I mentioned earlier, we intend to hold a forum the third Wednesday of every month from 3 to 4 p.m. That's Eastern for you guys in Mississippi. The next webinar will be March 17th, and USGS will be presenting on the EDH specifications. So with that, it is 3:59. I thank you all, and see you next month.